Greetings, comrades. It is I, Miriam, the only Miriam, and thank you so much for tuning in. So, Armenian is not an easy language, and I've never claimed that it is. But today we will be learning some pronunciation tips and tricks to make learning a bit easier. Before we begin, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Click on the zangak or the bell icon to receive notifications from this channel. Links to my one-on-one Armenian online tutoring program and previous videos will be down below in the description box. Եվ շատ շնորհակալություն ձեզ բոլորիդ, որ այսօր միացել եք եւ հետևում եք այս էջին. So first things first. Ah. There we have the Armenian letter for A. Ah. But you see, the reason why I put this there is because in Armenian, when you pronounce your A's, you truly want them to sound like ah. The thing is, in English, we have so many different sounds for the A letter. Sometimes we pronounce it as A or ah or ah. And in Armenian, it's always going to be ah. It's interesting because that A sound is even found in languages like Arabic or Farsi, but you don't find them at all in Armenian. And it sounds bizarre, but it's the truth. Moving on, we have the r sound, or the French R. Now, this sound is quite difficult for Americans to pronounce because we simply don't have it in English. But the thing is, there's actually a bit of a trick that you can use. So what you want to do is you want to keep your tongue by like your bottom row of teeth, like keep it down flat and try pronouncing an R sound. Normally when we pronounce words that have an R sound, we have like the tip of our tongue against the top row of our teeth. I know that sounds bizarre, but for example, red, ready. We all curve our tongues in a certain way, but if you try to keep your tongue close to like the bottom of your mouth or your bottom row of teeth, it turns a bit different. For example, if I try to say red this way, it will be red, red, because the back of your tongue essentially vibrates against like the top of your mouth or like the back of your throat. I understand this might be a bit weird, but if you test this out loud, alone or in front of a mirror, I think you can see what I mean. But here we also have the h sound, h. You see, it's interesting because Armenian actually has both a h sound and a ch sound, despite other Indo-European languages not always having both. For example, Russian doesn't have a h sound, but it has a ch sound. But English has a h sound, but not a ch sound. So basically, for the ch sound, we're going to do the same thing again. Try keeping your tongue like flat or against your bottom row of teeth, and essentially try to pronounce something with a h sound. For example, if we try to say hot, hot, without keeping our tongue down, the h sound comes out. But if I keep my tongue in place, like with the tip of my tongue against my bottom row of teeth, it becomes hot, hot. And if you keep experimenting, you'll also learn how to switch between ch and r, because r is closer to, I guess it's closer to the front of the mouth, while ch is really with the back of the throat. Moving on, here we have not a B, but the ch sound. You see, in Armenian, we have a ch sound, a j sound, and a j sound. Can you hear how that j sound is really a cross between the j and the ch sound? Now, my suggestion for learning how to pronounce this sound is a bit primitive, but it is essentially to keep switching between ch and j, because if you try to combine those sounds, I think at some point you will find how to make that j sound. Whenever I use Latin letters to type in Armenian, or when I spell out like the phonetic sounds of certain words when making these videos, I always write the j sound, sometimes with a ch or a j sound, but that's just with Latin letters. But in actual conversation, if you do use the j or the ch sound instead of j, then it is a bit more noticeable. For example, word for journey in Armenian is janapar. This can also be used for road or like a walkway, but janapar, we hear the j sound. But if we were to say janabar, it sounds entirely different. And same thing applies to chanapar. It sounds much harsher, but we have that in-between sound, j, for janapar. And so lastly, here we have this bottom row. It's about to get a bit more heated here, but first we have not a Y sound, not a y, but a t, t. Surprisingly, this sound is actually also found in German and is the Z, but t. Whenever I use Latin letters to write in Armenian, I always use a T and a Z sound for this t sound because it really is a cross between T and Z. If you want to really properly pronounce this word, this sound, I really recommend once again just speaking to yourself and saying t, but also z, and then combining those t, t. And next we have a z sound, different than t. Here's the deal. There's actually a very simple trick for making this z sound properly when speaking Armenian, especially if English is your first language. There are certain words like saint, sunset. Do you notice how even though these words end with ts, there's still that z sound? So let's take away the rest of the word from saint and just focus on that z sound. And now, lastly, we have a d sound, d. So we have a t, a t, and a d sound in Armenian. And the thing is, this sound is really a cross between d and z, d, d. A little hack that I share when giving my one-on-one Armenian tutoring sessions is that if you want to pronounce a sound, almost make it like you are going to say D, but then Z at the same time, d. Now, how do these three sound different? They practically sound the same. Now let's take the word dzuk, meaning fish in Armenian. It starts with this sound, dzuk, z. If it were to start with this sound, z, it would be dzuk. Do you hear how different dzuk is compared to dzuk? But then we also have the t sound. It would be tsuk. That's not the same as dzuk. Another example, how does t differentiate itself from t and d? Let's take the word tzarik, meaning flower in Armenian. If we were to say tzarik, it would not be the same as tzarik. And same thing applies to tzarik. It doesn't sound the same as tzarik. What about the t sound? How does it differentiate from these other sounds? There's a word, tatkel, meaning to jump, tatkel. If it started with the t sound, it would be tzatkel. That's not the same. Tzatkel is not tatkel. And zatkel is certainly not the same as tatkel. Before wrapping things up, a few more pronunciation tips are that please keep in mind that in Armenian, for the same sound, we often have a harsher version, but also a softer version. Like, for example, we have a r, or papuk r, meaning soft R sound, but we also have a r, which is like an R, but with like the rolling sound. Same thing applies to how we have a g sound, g, which sounds a lot like the C sound in Russian, but we also have a k sound, like a K, but also a g sound. As a final note, please remember to always keep everything you say very harsh. I know this sounds very bizarre, and I'm not saying it to like dramatize the Armenian language and say, oh, it's so harsh, it's so difficult to speak, but really, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes learners will make when they first start learning Armenian. Do you hear how du want es, meaning how are you in Armenian, sounds much harsher than when a lot of people pronounce it like du want es? English is a bit of a softer language, I would say, but Armenian is so much more harsher. And when you speak Armenian, you really have to push out the words, if that makes any sense. The oo sound is never oo the way it is in English. It's oo. The o sound is o, not o. Okay, so real quick, it seems as though I lost the original footage for my outro to this video, but thank you so much for tuning in once again. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Շատ շնորհակալություն եւ կտեսնեմ ես դες բոլորիդ։ Ցեթե բարով մնաք։